There are some smells that can take you back to the past stronger than any photograph. For me, it's the smell of warm asphalt after a summer shower. The moment I catch it, I'm right back there, in our little town, standing under the awning of the old pharmacy. And she's there, Annie, laughing with her head thrown back. She always thought it was funny how a sudden downpour could take the whole town by surprise, sending everyone running for cover like it was some kind of children's game. That laugh, so clear and real, still echoes in my memory. We were young then, and we thought we had our whole lives ahead of us, a life as endless as that summer road, steaming after the rain. In that moment, I was absolutely sure that this was how it would always be. Us, our town, and these simple, easy joys. I didn't know then that I wasn't building a future. I was just bottling up a memory, one I'd have to carry with me for the rest of my life. A memory of something that was lost, before I even realized it was gone. It all began in a town so small, everyone knew not only your name, but what color socks you'd put on that morning. Life there flowed slowly, like a river in summer, lazy and predictable. I worked at the local paper, the Evening Herald, writing about everything and anything. Town council meetings, the high school baseball team's latest victory, Mrs. Henderson's anniversary, where she baked the biggest apple pie in the state. It was a quiet job that didn't promise to set the world on fire, but it gave you a feeling of belonging, of being connected to the heart of that small world. My workday started at 9 and ended at 5, and every evening I knew what was waiting for me. What was waiting for me was Annie. She was a waitress at the only decent place in town, Joe's Diner, and her shift ended at 5:30. I'd walk over to get her, and we'd go for a walk. Our routes never changed, either down Main Street, saying hello to everyone we passed, or to the old park by the lake, where we'd sit on our favorite bench and watch the sun dip behind the hills. It was our ritual, our small tradition that stitched the days into weeks and the weeks into months. Our life was simple, almost painfully so. Breakfast at home, a sandwich for lunch, dinner at her place or mine. Her parents lived on the next street over. Mine were 2 blocks away. On Sundays, we'd go to church, and after the service, we'd all gather for a big family dinner at one of our houses. This repetition wasn't stifling. On the contrary, it was calming. It created the illusion that the world was a reliable place, held together by these simple things. Morning coffee, the creak of the old swing on her porch, the taste of her cherry pie. We didn't dream of anything extravagant. Our dream was to buy a small house on the edge of town, the one with the blue shutters, get a dog, and just live. To live that quiet, measured life where the biggest event of the year was the county fair, and the biggest tragedy was when our favorite team lost. We were convinced that happiness was the absence of turmoil, and we had it, that happiness, every single day, without even noticing its value. It was as familiar as the air we breathed, and at the center of that calm, steady world was her, Annie. She didn't look like the girls on magazine covers. She had light brown hair that always escaped from her ponytail and freckles on her nose that she was embarrassed by, but I adored. But the main thing about her was her eyes, large and brown, and it seemed like they reflected the whole sky. She was the embodiment of that town, calm, dependable, a little naive, and incredibly kind. Annie knew how to find joy in the little things. The wildflowers I'd pick for her on my way, a stretch of warm weather, a good joke. Her world was right there. between her parents' house, Joe's diner, and our park. She didn't long to see anything else because she was sure that she already had everything that mattered. Our dynamic was simple and clear. I was the dreamer who read books about faraway places and, deep down, wanted something more, though I was afraid to admit it to myself. She was the anchor that kept my feet on the ground. We completed each other. I'd tell her about cities I'd never seen, and she'd tell me about the importance of having roots. Our plans for life were only shared on the surface. Yes, we both wanted a house and a family, but I imagined it as a safe harbor to return to after adventures in the wide world, while for her, that harbor was the entire world. That difference between us was hidden deep, under layers of daily routines and affection, and we both chose not to look at it too closely. There was plenty of romance between us. We could sit for hours on the shore of the lake, just quietly holding hands. I wrote clumsy poems for her that I published in the newspaper under a pseudonym, and the whole town would try to guess who the mysterious poet was. She would save me a slice of the warmest pie at the diner, even if they were already closing. It was a quiet, deep love, like the river that flowed past the town. But sometimes, in rare moments, that incompatibility would break through to the surface. One time, I was excitedly telling her about my cousin who had moved to Chicago for work and was sending back postcards of skyscrapers. "Can you imagine the life there?" I said. "The opportunities?" And she looked at me with her serious eyes and quietly answered, "But do we really need anything more than what we have here?" There was no reproach in her voice, only sincere confusion. She couldn't understand my yearning for the unknown, just as I couldn't fully grasp her complete contentment with what was. We loved each other, but we were looking in different directions. I was looking at the horizon, and she was looking at the ground beneath her feet, at her native soil. And I suppose we could have lived like that forever, if a letter addressed to me hadn't arrived at the newspaper office one morning. It was in a crisp, white envelope with the embossed logo of a major Chicago publisher. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a job offer, a position as an intern in the features department at the Chicago Chronicle, one of the biggest papers in the country. A long time ago, more as a joke than anything serious, I had sent them a few of my best articles. I had forgotten all about it, figuring my stories about apple pies would hardly interest anyone in the big city. But they were interested. Someone saw a fresh perspective and an ability to find the story in the everyday in my writing. They were offering me a salary 3 times what I was making, a room in a company dorm to start, and most importantly, a future, a prospect. That word echoed in my head like a bell. It was a chance, the kind of chance I'd read about in books, the kind I'd dreamed of on quiet nights while looking at the stars. It was a ticket to that other world I'd only seen on my brother's postcards. My heart was pounding. I felt a mixture of wild excitement and animal fear. It was a turning point, that moment when you have to take a step into the unknown. But my first thought after the euphoria was of Annie. How would I tell her? What would she say? I knew the answer before I even asked the question. This letter, this white envelope, wasn't just a job offer. It was the first real crack in our perfect world. Until then, all our differences had been theoretical, hidden away in conversations about a distant future. And now, the future had arrived and knocked on the door. My internal conflict was unbearable. On one hand, there was the dream, the ambition, the chance to prove to myself and the world that I was capable of something. It was the voice of my ego, the voice of the professional who wanted to grow. On the other hand, there was Annie, our quiet life, the house with the blue shutters, the smell of her pies. It was the voice of my heart, the voice of love and comfort. And these two voices were screaming inside me, drowning each other out. That evening I went to her with the letter in my pocket. We sat on our bench by the lake, but the usual peace was gone. I was silent, not knowing how to start the conversation that would change our lives forever. She felt my tension. "What is it, Jack?" she asked quietly. And so, taking a deep breath, I began to speak. I talked about Chicago, about the opportunities, about how it was a chance for both of us. But the more I talked, the more her face seemed to recede, as if I was looking at her through a thick pane of glass. In her eyes, I didn't see joy for me. I saw fear. The fear of losing everything we had. And I realized this wasn't just a choice between two cities. It was a choice between two versions of life. And two versions of myself. The next few weeks turned into a kind of hell. The news of my possible move spread through town faster than a wildfire. And everyone felt it was their duty to offer their opinion. My father, who had worked his whole life at the local lumber mill, would clap me on the shoulder and say with pride, "Go on, son. Show 'em what a boy from our neck of the woods is made of." He saw my success as compensation for his own unfulfilled dreams. My mother would quietly pack warm socks for me and sigh, but in her eyes, I saw the hope that her son would achieve more than she and my father ever had. My friends at the bar would buy me beers and joke about how I'd forget them once I became a famous reporter. Even my boss, Mr. Henderson, called me into his office, took off his glasses, and said, "Jack, I'll miss your articles, but a chance like this comes once in a lifetime. Don't miss it. This town isn't going anywhere. You can always come back." The whole world seemed to be pushing me in one direction. Everyone saw only the positives: a career, money, success. No one but me saw the other side of the coin, the price I would have to pay. Under all this pressure, I started to convince myself that the move was just a job. I told myself and Annie that it was temporary. "I'll go for a year or two, get on my feet, and then you'll come to me, or I'll come back, and we'll buy that house," I'd say. But my voice sounded unconvincing even to my own ears. I painted pictures of our future in Chicago, a big apartment, walks along Lake Michigan, new and interesting friends. I tried to wrap my dream in such a pretty package that she would like it too. But Annie wasn't buying it. She saw the truth I was trying to hide from myself. I wasn't choosing us. I was choosing me. Public opinion, my family's expectations, it all created a powerful background against which my own doubts seemed like weakness, like cowardice. In our world, to be the guy who turned down a chance like that for a girl would have meant admitting defeat, and I was afraid of that. I was afraid of sitting in that same bar 20 years later, drinking the same beer, and wondering what if. That fear turned out to be stronger than the fear of losing her. And so I began to prepare for my departure, repeating to myself like a mantra every day, "It's just a job. It's temporary. Everything will be fine." But every time I met her gaze, full of silent pain, I knew I was lying to her and to myself. The tension between us grew with each passing day. We barely spoke, and if we did, it was about trivial things, avoiding the main topic. But it couldn't last forever. The explosion happened a week before I was due to leave. It was a warm evening, and we were sitting on her porch swing as usual. But the cozy silence had been replaced by a tense, heavy one. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "Jack, let's talk for real," she began, and her voice trembled. And so we talked. It wasn't a fight with yelling and broken dishes. It was a quiet, exhausting argument where every word cut deeper than a knife. She talked about how she didn't understand why her love wasn't enough, why our world, which seemed so perfect to her, had turned out to be a cramped cage for me. She cried and asked what was wrong with her, why I was ready to trade her for some phantom opportunities. And then, in desperation, she said the thing I feared the most. "Take me with you. I'll go with you to the ends of the earth. I'll find a job there. Any job. We'll be together, just like you promised. The important thing is that we're together." Her words should have been a lifeline. There it was, the compromise, the solution. But in that moment I felt not relief, but panic. I suddenly had a crystal clear image of her, my Annie, in loud, alien Chicago. I pictured her getting lost in the crowds, missing her parents, our park, the simple and understandable life she knew. I imagined her light gradually fading in the shadow of the skyscrapers. And I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't take on that kind of responsibility. My answer was cruel in its honesty. "Annie, you wouldn't be happy there," I said, looking away. "It's not your kind of place. You'd wither there, like a flower without sunlight." "But isn't my happiness being with you?" she whispered. And I had no answer to that. Because the truth was, I wasn't so much going to Chicago as I was running from our town. I wanted to start with a clean slate, to become a new person. And in this new life I imagined for myself, there was no room for her, the real, down-to-earth her. My dream turned out to be selfish. It was only for me. In that moment, it became blindingly clear that we weren't just looking in different directions. We were living in different universes. My career, my ambitions, were incompatible with her need for stability and roots, and no compromise could fix that. The argument ended with nothing. She went inside, quietly closing the door behind her, and I was left sitting on the porch, feeling like the loneliest man on earth. The last week passed in a fog. We didn't fight anymore. We hardly spoke at all. Silence became our new language, heavy, thick, like swamp water. I packed my things, and every item I placed in the suitcase felt like another brick in the wall I was building between us. An old t-shirt we wore when we painted her parents' fence. A book she gave me for Christmas. Every object screamed with memories, and I tried my best not to listen. The day of my departure was sunny and cloudless, which seemed like a cruel joke. My dad lent me his old car for the drive to Chicago. My parents and a few friends came to see me off. My mother cried. My father shook my hand firmly. Everyone wished me luck. And I just stared at her window, hoping and fearing that she would come out. She didn't. I knew she was home. I knew she was standing behind the curtain, watching, but she didn't give me the chance for a final look, a last touch. It was her silent verdict, a breakup without words that was louder than any shouting match. I got in the car, and the feeling was surreal. Here I was, taking the biggest step of my life, chasing my dream, and I felt nothing but emptiness inside. I started the engine, and its roars seemed to shatter the silence of our town. Pulling away from our street, I took one last look at her house, at the porch swing where we had spent so many hours. In an instant, it all became the past. I had chosen my path, the path up, toward success, toward the big city. But in that same moment, I felt something inside me break. It was like a physical pain. I drove down the highway, and little towns flew past the windows, one after another, all of them looking like ours. And in each one, I saw our possible future. A couple pushing a stroller, someone planting flowers by a house with blue shutters. I pressed down on the gas, trying to escape from those images, from myself. I had chosen my path, and I had lost something at the same time. Something so big and important that I couldn't even grasp the scale of the loss back then. I just felt it as a phantom pain in my chest, like a draft in my soul, where just yesterday it had been warm and cozy. Arriving in Chicago was like jumping into ice water. The noise, the crowds, the endless stream of cars, the skyscrapers that seemed to prop up the sky. It was all overwhelming and oppressive. I settled into a small room in a company dorm, and that first night, I couldn't sleep. Sirens wailed outside my window, people were shouting, music blared from a bar downstairs. This cacophony of sounds was the complete opposite of the silence I was used to. And in that silence, I had always heard her breathing next to me. Here, I heard only the hum of a strange, indifferent city. The first days at work were filled with stress and new experiences. I ran errands, got coffee for the senior reporters, and tried to get into the frantic rhythm of the newsroom. Everyone around me was ambitious, sharp, focused on themselves. No one asked how I was doing. No one cared about my feelings. I was a cog in a huge machine, and strangely, there was an uncomfortable relief in that. When you're completely immersed in work, when you don't have a free minute to think, it saves you. I ran from my thoughts into my work like it was a shelter. But in the evenings, returning to my empty room, I was left alone with myself, and then the emptiness would wash over me. It was a strange feeling. On one hand, I had achieved what I wanted. I was in Chicago, working for a prestigious newspaper. I was free. But this freedom felt like a vacuum. I could go anywhere, do anything, but I didn't want to. I would sit by the window, looking at the millions of city lights, and feel incredibly lonely. The shadow of Annie, the shadow of our past life, was with me. It sat in the chair next to me, lay on my pillow. I heard her voice in the sound of the wind. I saw her face in the crowd. I wasn't truly missing her yet. It was something else, a feeling that I had made an irreversible mistake, but I pushed that thought away. I convinced myself that it was just an adjustment period, that it would get easier with time. I was already in a new place, but with a shadow on my shoulders. The shadow of a small town, a quiet life, and a girl I had left behind to chase my own shadow of success. Months passed, then years. I slowly but surely climbed the career ladder. From an intern, I became a junior reporter, then got my own column. I wrote about high-profile court cases, political scandals, the life of the city. My articles got noticed. I was praised. My salary grew. I moved from the dorm to my own apartment with a view of the lake. I bought a new car. I made acquaintances. colleagues I would sometimes go to a bar with after work. Life had settled down. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. But inside, something was wrong. The new city, the new routine, the new people, it all felt unreal, like a set in a play. I lived, worked, socialized, but it felt like I wasn't fully there. My search for happiness brought no joy. I tried dating. The women were beautiful, smart, successful, but every conversation with them felt like a job interview. We discussed career plans, market indexes, new art exhibits. But none of them ever asked if I'd seen the sunrise over the lake. None of them laughed as genuinely as Annie did. There was none of that simple, unconditional warmth in those relationships. I compared every one of them to her and realized I wasn't looking for a new love, but a copy of the old one. And of course, I never found it. My success brought no emotional fulfillment. I'd get a bonus for a good story, shake hands with important people, see my name in the paper, and in that moment, I'd feel pride. But an hour later, the feeling would vanish, leaving the same old emptiness behind. The joy was fleeting, like a camera flash. Once, I had a particularly difficult assignment and worked on it for weeks without a day off. When the article was published and made a huge splash, my editor threw a party in my honor. Everyone was drinking champagne and congratulating me, and I was standing in the middle of the noisy room, holding a glass, and I suddenly realized with perfect clarity that I had no one to share this success with. Not really. There was no one who would be happy not for my article but for me. Someone who wouldn't care about my achievements, only about whether I was happy. And I knew I wasn't happy. I had achieved everything I had dreamed of, but I had lost the one thing that mattered. My life was like a beautiful, expensive house that no one lived in. At first, we still tried to stay in touch. For the first few months, we wrote letters. Long, detailed ones. I would tell her about Chicago, about work, trying to paint it all in bright colors, hiding my loneliness. She would write about the news in our town. Who got married? Who had a baby? What was new at Joe's Diner? Her letters smelled like home. I would read them several times, and it felt like I was sitting on her porch again. Then we started calling each other. But the conversations were awkward. The connection was bad, and we were constantly asking, "What? Say that again, I didn't hear you." There weren't just hundreds of miles between us, but also a crackle on the line that symbolized the crack in our relationship. Gradually, the letters got shorter. Work took up more and more of my time and energy. I would come home exhausted and just not have the strength to write. I'd put it off until tomorrow. Then the day after, her letters changed too. A certain distance appeared in them. She asked less about my life and wrote more about hers, about going to the movies with her friends, about helping her parents with repairs. I read it and understood that her life was going on without me, and it was full and real, and mine was not. Losing touch wasn't tragic. It didn't happen in a single day. There was no fight over the phone or an angry letter. It was gradual, mundane, and all the more terrifying for it. We just drifted apart, like two boats that had sailed from the same shore in different directions. At first, you can still shout, wave your hand, but then all that's left is a tiny dot on the horizon that melts into the mist. And then the moment came when I realized I hadn't written to her in a month. I sat down at my desk, picked up a pen, but I didn't know what to write. Tell her about another success at work. complain about my loneliness? Both options felt false, so I put the paper aside. I was the one who stopped writing. I justified it with fatigue, with being busy, with the need to move on. But deep down, I knew I was just scared. Scared to hear on the phone or read in a letter that there was someone else in her life. Scared to finally have it confirmed that my train had left the station for good. So I chose silence. It was easier than the truth. And one day, I just stopped waiting for letters. The mailman was no longer the most important person in my world. The silence that fell between us was deafening. The years went by. I got used to life in Chicago. It was no longer foreign, just familiar. I moved a few times, got a few promotions. I had short-lived affairs, superficial friendships. I was living, but the feeling that I had lost something real never left me. It wasn't a sharp pain like it used to be. It had turned into a quiet, dull ache that lived somewhere deep inside, like a chronic illness. It would remind me of itself at the most unexpected moments. When I saw an elderly couple holding hands. When I smelled freshly cut grass. When I ate apple pie in some cafe, and the taste was nothing like hers. I began to understand that the choice I had made all those years ago wasn't just a choice between a career and love. It was a choice between sparkle and warmth. I chose the sparkle. And now I was living in the cold glow of my own success. I knew I couldn't turn back time. I couldn't just show up in our town and say, "I made a mistake, let's start over." It would have been dishonest and absurd. Her life, I was sure, had moved on, and mine was frozen at the point when I got in the car and drove away. Everything that came after seemed like just a long, difficult road to nowhere. The first time I cried over her was 10 years after we had parted. It happened unexpectedly. I was sitting in my apartment, flipping through TV channels, and suddenly I stumbled upon an old movie that we had once watched together in our little cinema. I remembered how she laughed at the main character's jokes, how she flinched during the tense moments and hid her face on my shoulder. And all at once, all those years, all the armor I had so carefully built around my heart crumbled to dust. The memory of her warmth, her scent, the sound of her laugh, hit me with such force that I couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down my cheeks. They weren't tears for a lost love. They were tears for a lost version of myself. For the boy who knew how to enjoy the simple things, who believed in forever, and who was truly happy without even realizing it. I was crying for the life that could have been, the life that I myself had cast aside. Almost 30 years passed. My hair had turned gray and my face had deep lines. I was getting ready to retire, having achieved everything I could in my profession. I returned to our town for the funeral of a distant relative. The town had hardly changed. The same streets, the same houses. Only the trees were taller, and the paint on the walls was more faded. After the ceremony, I went into the local supermarket to buy a bottle of water. Wandering between the aisles, I suddenly stopped dead in my tracks. Standing by the vegetables was her, Annie. I recognized her immediately. Of course she had changed. Time had touched her too. But her posture, her movements, the way she tilted her head as she chose tomatoes, it was all so familiar. She was with a little girl, about 5 years old, who was holding her hand. "Grandma, can I have a candy?" the little girl's voice piped up. "Grandma!" That word hit me harder than any news. She turned to the little girl, and I saw her face. Her eyes still had the same light in them, but now it was mixed with a sense of peace and wisdom. She was beautiful. not with the youthful beauty I remembered, but with a different, mature, deep beauty. She said something gently to her granddaughter, and then a man standing at the checkout called to them, a gray-haired, sturdy man in a plaid shirt. He smiled at her, and she smiled back. And in that smile there was so much warmth and shared life that I felt like an outsider in this world. I could have walked over. I could have said, "Hi, Annie. It's me, Jack." Maybe we would have talked for a few minutes about our lives. But I couldn't. I just stood there and silently watched as they paid and left the store. I saw her in her new life, happy, peaceful, where she belonged. And in that moment, I didn't feel jealousy or regret, but a strange, bitter awareness. I could have made a different choice, but I didn't. And that was a good thing for her. By staying here, she had built her happiness, a real, quiet, deep happiness. And if I had taken her with me, I would have destroyed everything. I was just an episode in her life, but she, for me, was the whole life I had given up. I walked out of the store and got in my car. I didn't cry. I just sat and looked out at the street where we once walked holding hands. In that moment, I stopped blaming myself. The decades of quiet regret, the guilt, the endless what-ifs, it all suddenly disappeared, dissolved like sugar in hot tea. I understood a simple thing. There are no right or wrong choices. There is only the choice and its consequences, and we live with them. I chose my path, and she chose hers. And our paths, once they diverged, led each of us to where we were meant to be. I got my career, my experiences, my memories. She got her family, her home, her grandchildren. Was I happy? Probably not in the same way she was. But I lived my life, honestly, the best I knew how. Philosophers say that time is a river, but I think it's more like a crossroads. Every day, every minute, we stand at one and choose which way to turn. And once we've turned, we can never know what was waiting for us on the other path. You can spend your whole life looking back, trying to see that other path. Or you can just keep walking forward, looking at your feet. Seeing her happy, I finally stopped looking back. I accepted my choice. I didn't justify it, I didn't regret it, I just accepted it. As a fact of my biography, a story about a love that couldn't withstand the distance. A story about a man who chose his career. That's all true, but there's another truth. It's a story about how sometimes, by letting someone go, you give them a chance at happiness. Maybe the greatest expression of my love for her was that I didn't take her with me to Chicago. I left her there, where her roots were, where her strength was, and she blossomed. And me, I now sit here, watching the sunset, and I feel not sorrow but a gentle sadness, a sadness for what has passed, and a gratitude that it was ever there at all. And in this silence I find not regret, but peace.